In this tutorial, we are going to use Photoshop to create a cool looking picture-in-picture effect. It's a pretty simple process. We're just going to use layers, layer styles, the shape tools, and something called clipping mask to go ahead and create this effect. Now, I have a picture from the TV series Lost that we are going to use as our example picture, and what I'm going to try to do is bring this cast into the focus of the picture and sort of dull out all the surrounding area. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I need to do is I need to duplicate this background layer, and I'm just going to go ahead and do so by dragging the background layer down onto the new layer icon, and you see I get a background copy. And it's always good habit to rename your layers, and I'm going to go ahead and just rename that smaller version just so I always know which layer I am on. And so you see I have two layers, the background layer and the smaller version layer. I'm going to also need a third layer for this tutorial, but I need it to be completely blank for now. So I'm just going to go ahead and come down and click on my create a new layer, and you notice it gives me a third layer which is completely blank, and it's just named layer 1. Now, I know I just told you to always rename your layer, but I'm actually not going to worry about it in this case because here in a moment this layer will be renamed automatically. The problem I do have is I need this layer to be in between my background and smaller version. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag it and drop it in the stacking order so it's right in the middle. So my stacking order goes background on the bottom, layer 1 in the middle, and smaller version on top. So now I'm going to use the shape tool to create an area that I want to be sort of the center of my picture-in-picture effect. I'm going to come over here to my shape tool, and you can choose any of the shapes, the rectangle, the rounded rectangle, whichever shape you want to use. I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool. I sort of like that, but you're free to use whichever shape you would like. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to draw it around the cast, because I want these guys to be the center of my picture. Once I draw it and let go, you notice nothing really happens on my picture, but over here in my layers panel, my middle layer is now called shape 1, and that's for this rounded rectangle shape that I've put on that layer. Now I'm going to use this shape to create what is known as a clipping mask. And a clipping mask is essentially cropping a picture without cropping a picture. Let me show you how it's done and then you'll understand. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. I still have my rounded rectangle tool selected. I'm going to come over here and shape 1 is highlighted. On my keyboard, just to the left of the space bar, I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And as I hold down the Alt key, I'm going to move so that my cursor goes right over or right in the middle of the shape 1 layer and the smaller version layer. It's right on this border. As I do that, I'll get what is called the clipping icon. It's sort of two circles interlocked with an arrow pointing to the left. Once I get that, I'm just going to go ahead and click once, and you'll notice that nothing really happened to my picture, but in my layers panel, my smaller version layer has indented to the right with an arrow pointing downward. This means that this layer has been clipped. To sort of see what it really did, I'm going to remove the visibility of my background, and there you go. I've sort of cropped this smaller version using the clipping mask. Let me go ahead and turn the background layer back on, and I want this to look like a picture, so I'm going to go ahead and apply some effects to this border here of my rounded rectangle. To do that, I just make sure I have my shape 1 layer selected, and I'm going to come down to my layer styles panel, and I'm going to put a border on it. Remember, an outline, a border in Photoshop is called stroke, so go ahead and click on that, and up will come my stroke menu. And in this case, I'm going to use a white stroke. You can choose whichever color you would like, and the size of your stroke is really going to depend on your picture. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put mine at 6 for now. I can always edit it if I want to. You also have the ability to choose outside, inside, or center. You can just play around with those. I'm going to stay with an outside stroke, and I'll go ahead and say OK. Now you notice down below shape 1, Here indented I have effects and I have stroke. Okay, that means these effects apply to this shape and this shape only. If I want to edit those, I can just go ahead and double click here on stroke. It brings my menu back up. I'm going to change my 6 to 8. Go ahead and say OK, and it gives me a little thicker outline. So that's how you would edit those. I'm also, to the shape, I'm going to add a drop shadow. So I'll go ahead to my layer style, go into my drop shadow menu, and a drop shadow is just sort of a shadow that surrounds your layer. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my distance quite a bit so you can see what it looks like right there. Now I don't really want my distance that far away, but it gives you the ability to see it. I'm going to put my distance at about 15, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change my angle to 130. You can do this however you would like it. Actually, I'm going to make my distance about 20. And so what I have now is a shadow coming off this right side and down below the bottom. That's what I want. And you can play around with settings to get what you want for your picture. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And I sort of have the makings of a picture-in-picture effect. Now, I'm not really totally happy with what all my shape covers, but I can adjust that. With my Shape 1 layer highlighted, I can go up to my Edit menu, and I can come down to my Transforms. Or, with my Shape 1 highlighted, I can hold down Control and hit T on my keyboard, and it just goes ahead and brings up my resize handles, and I can resize this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more to my picture. And I can also rotate it. I'll go ahead and rotate that a little bit. Now, I lost her foot, so I kind of have to come down a little bit. And I want a little bit more of that chair. Once I think I have it, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And I've transformed my shape. Now I'm going to work on my background so I can make this center area really stand out. You can do whatever you like, but I'm going to kind of go with a blurry black and white background. That's sort of an effect I like. So I'm going to highlight my background layer, and I'm actually going to rename it just so it's completely editable. And once I do that, I'm going to come down here to my create a new fill or adjustment layer, and you can play around with all of these settings to see what you like. For instance, you could come up to hue and saturation, and you could mess with the hue a little bit, and you could get some really neat looking effects. I mean, that's kind of a cool effect. If I don't like it, I can just grab my hue saturation layer, and I can just drop it in the trash can and delete it. Okay, and you can play around with all of those. I'm going to go to black and white. Gives me a nice looking black and white background, and my picture is starting to stand out a little bit. Now I just want to make this background a little blurry. So once again, I have to make sure I have my background layer highlighted. I'm just going to go up to my filter menu, and you can play with all of these. I'm going to go to blur and to a radio blur. And I've already set my settings. I have a zoom blur method at best quality and a setting of 5. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And you see I've kind of blurred my background. Now the final thing that I want to do is, as I look at my picture, I notice there's not a lot of room down at the bottom and there's more room at the top. So I want to expand my selection a little bit. I'll just highlight my shape, Control T on my keyboard, and I can just go ahead and adjust up a little bit. I'm actually going to make it go over to the left just a little bit and hit enter. And there we go. We got a pretty cool looking picture-in-picture effect using Adobe Photoshop.